Welcome to Ohio Roots, the official podcast of the Ohio Genealogical Society. Join us as we embark on a captivating journey through Ohio's rich genealogy, history, and abundant resources. Hosted by me, OGS Executive Director Noel Poirier, this podcast brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests, from OGS members, chapter leaders, and staff to renowned genealogists, historians, and influential figures within the genealogical community. Each episode delves into fascinating topics and captivating stories. So grab your headphones, hit that play button, and join us on this enthralling journey of Ohio's roots. My guest on this episode of the Ohio Roots podcast is Billie Fogarty. Billie is a full-time professional genealogist. She's past president of the Association of Professional Genealogists. She does a lot of speaking. She's very active with the Oklahoma Genealogical Society, with the Oklahoma Historical Society. But we're speaking to her today about something that I find particularly interesting, which is conducting research on your Native American ancestors. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed it. So let's get started. Well, thank you, Billie, for joining me today for the Ohio Roots podcast. I've been really looking forward to this discussion since I first emailed you about it. I'm really excited to talk to you about the possibilities of doing genealogical research on Native American ancestors, and particularly those of the tribes that were associated with the state of Ohio, although I don't think we need to limit it to that, since Ohio individuals, as you well know, I'm sure, went all over the country. so they could be all over the place. I will start with a question I ask everybody, which is, how did you get started? What was the impetus for your interest in even doing genealogy at all?
It's a two-phase answer. One is when I first saw a genealogy publication, I was 10 years old, and we had just had 5th grade is when you do American history, usually in the curriculum. Okay. And so we had just studied about the American Revolution and all the, George Washington and Virginia and all of that sort of thing. And my granddad, we were at his house one day, and he brought out a small paperback book that was his family surname, which was Cornwell. Okay. He brought that out, and we were, the family was looking through this thing. It had been published just by hand, mostly, by his Aunt Mary. And she had, in the 1920s and 30s, she had written letters to family members that she knew about who were named Cornwell. She had 5 sons named Cornwell, and she was interested in passing that information along to them. The book was titled The Cornwell Family, and it traced my granddad's male line back to the earliest one that she'd been able to find, who was Peyton Cornwell, who was born in 1774 in Virginia. And so that struck a note with me as a 10-year-old. Right. We'd just been studying about that time period and George Washington and that whole process there. So it clicked through my mind that here was somebody who I could trace the lineage. Here are the names, and all she had in it was names, birth dates and places, marriage dates and places, and death dates and places. But it was, and then all of the children. And I could see my mother. I wasn't old enough to be in it, but my mother was in it. My grandfather, I knew some of these names. And it was like, oh my goodness. I wondered at that time if that ancestor, Peyton Cornwell, who was a child, probably about my age at the time the revolution was going on, I wonder if he was affected, if he knew that he was living in this time. Well, that was just kind of there and just a question, but it suddenly dawned on me that I just wasn't, I didn't just pop out of the cabbage patch. I had a lineage, and it was like, wow, how cool is this? So I was always kind of history oriented.
Mm.
I taught history. That was where I was interested, but I didn't get seriously interested until we moved to Washington, D.C.
Okay. Yeah.
And literally my mother, mothers, she requested, make that demanded, that I go to the National Archives to
Sure.
look up something because she had gotten interested. So my first trip to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. to look up a family record
Right.
hooked me for life.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a long process, but it's been a long standing.
It's interesting. You bring up a point which I think I can relate to as a historian. Is birth, marriage, and death dates are nice, and they make everything very organized.
Yes.
But knowing and wondering,
Yes.
about the stories of those names and dates.
Yes.
For me, has always been the motivation for doing any genealogy. And if you're like me, I go off on tangents because I'll find a relative who actually has an interesting life, and I'll spend way too much time on them when they're not really that related. So I think that's really great. Now, one of your specialties, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today is doing Native American research.
Yes, it is.
Particularly doing genealogy for Native American lineages. What are the greatest challenges for that? Because it seems to me that would be a huge challenge.
There are records, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But the challenge is usually that, since I do this for other people, the challenge is that they have lost. Generally, the people who come to me have lost contact with the tribe.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
What they have is a story, a legend, if you will,
right,
that they have Native American ancestry. Well, sometimes they don't know the tribe. They
right.
don't know where it came in. They don't know
Sure.
how far back. And so trying to get that person now
Mm-hmm.
into a place where they could have had contact with the tribe, where that particular ancestor would have been recorded in
Mm-hmm.
some tribal document so that we can actually prove it. That's
Right.
usually where the rub comes in.
Right.
And sometimes when you look through that and try to trace that family story,
Mm-hmm.
they have a particular person has put together what they think they were
Sure.
told.
Sure. Right.
and as it's handed down, and it's always a mixture of misinformation,
Mm-hmm.
lost information, and simply a lack of
Okay.
credible information to do. So it's usually disappointing when people come and you say, well, first we have to find from you back.
Right.
You can't just skip those generations to go back to the person that you believe is the Native American.
Right.
It's usually, people like to claim Cherokee because it's a big tribe.
Sure.
But not everybody is Cherokee. So,
you mentioned that there are resources
there are.
that people can go after, and I think that's probably something that a lot of folks who don't delve into that area may not realize.
Mm-hmm.
What are those resources? Particularly, I mean, we can talk in general, but also about Ohio. You think?
Well, one of the things that when people say my specialty is Indian research. Well,
mm-hmm.
there really is not a such thing as that. It's tribal research.
Right.
You must get to the tribe, and you must know what that connection is with the tribe itself.
Mm-hmm.
And those records, all of them are tribal entities. You have to know what that is. So it's, yes, the federal government was a big resource for written records, but several of the tribes themselves did have written records. Those were few, just a few of those. Most of the tribal history is more oral,
Right. Right.
handed down rather than written. But also when you end up with the tribe, depending on the tribal history, you're dealing with usually an Indian agent, and you're going to be looking at records by their own biases
Right.
and
Right.
lack of information about what they're seeing and what they're doing. Some were better than others, so we depend on those records a
Right.
lot to get to it. Once the United States government started moving tribal nations out
Right.
of where they were to make room for all the European settlers, you have those written records from that point of view. Well, that's often not the point of view of the members who were being forcibly removed.
Right. Right.
And so you have a bit of a disconnect there as to what the real history is and what we have
Right.
recorded. But generally, if they were going to be required to move, and usually that started, well, in the case of Ohio,
Right.
that was one of the original Indian territories.
Right. Right.
Tribes were moved to there and ultimately then removed from Ohio. And so for whatever, the tribes from Ohio moved generally into Kansas, Oklahoma,
Right.
Texas, some of the other states around, but
Right.
moving always farther west.
It's interesting. You mentioned a couple things that I think people need to appreciate, and I think as historians, those of us who are trained as historians, we recognize bias when we read it in historical documents, whereas other people may not, because we're taught to do that. And then you also mentioned the idea of people were relocated, which is the idea that when I was taught history, and I'm in my 50s, I was told I grew up in Pennsylvania, that the Delaware moved to Ohio, as if they somehow preferred to go to Ohio, and so that movement. When I think about documenting an ancestor who might have had connections, right? That movement, that regular movement, in the 18th and 19th centuries, maybe every 10 or 15 years, they're moving. That has to be a huge challenge when you are doing what you were saying earlier of finding that person's ancestor who may have been in a physical place where they might have interacted.
Yes. And that's, so, sometimes I'll have people who are living in areas, specifically the Cherokee, where the Cherokee were not located.
Right.
And they will claim a particular tribe,
right,
not having the knowledge to look at the tribe and to say, okay, what was the history of this tribe? Where was it? When was it there? And what were the movements of that tribe? And so sometimes those who cling to those stories, they could very well be true, but if their ancestor was no longer living as a tribal member in the community, in the tribal setting, trying to prove it is, we have no documents to prove that. So it's sometimes a disappointment to people to realize that could be, but we can't prove it because they were not located where any interaction with the tribe would have taken place, and that connection has been lost.
I think when you talked about the idea of you have records of Indian agents and government records and those things, and when I think about, particularly with Native Americans, the idea of, particularly later, not necessarily Ohio specifically, but the use of Indian schools to deny them their language and their history and their culture, and how that may also have impacted on our efforts as genealogists and historians to find people.
Oh, absolutely. That that's a rather sad experience, for our nation as well as those individual peoples.
Right.
So it's frustrating, but sometimes it's just the way it is. So
one of the things that in Ohio, which was very common here, of course, was there were several Moravian missions that were located in Ohio, and then, of course, kind of on the fringes of Indiana and Michigan, established here. And in reading the diaries of men like John Heckwelder and Mortimer and Zeisberger, what you discover is the Native Americans at that time, their names are obviously altered dramatically when they convert to Christianity. And I'm curious, how frequently, just as with our immigrant ancestors whose names get anglicized, how common is that to find in your research and doing Native American history?
It's common, very common. You will often, you look for those records that will list both names.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, many times you're not dealing with just two names, not just an anglicized or what they went by, but during different periods of that person's life, they may have gone by different names depending on where they were in their growth and development. And so it's something that you really, if you have that story, you really need to find out and learn about the history and culture of that particular tribe. Now, as I said, you may be sadly mistaken about which tribe it is, but and with, we have 574 federally recognized tribes. So, and, that's another 35 or 40 state recognized tribes. Well, each of those have a different history. And it's important to recognize that it's not all the same. It's not something that you want to skip over, and because you won't find your ancestor unless you know when they would have been connected, where they would have been connected, and does your family history, if I can find your ancestors in every single U.S. Census record, the regular U.S. Census record, we're not going to find them in the Indian records because they would not have been counted in the census. So it's important that you look at that whole picture.
The Ohio Roots podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. To learn more about joining, visit www.ogs.org.
If you enjoy listening to the Ohio Roots podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could go to whatever platform it is that you listen and give us a good review. Reviews help us get more listeners and reach more people with Ohio Roots and what we're trying to do with the Ohio Genealogical Society. So please leave us a nice review, and thanks for listening. When you're doing this kind of research, what for you is what's the highlight of doing that research for people? Like what do you find really brings you great joy when you're doing specifically looking at folks who have asked you to try to trace their native roots?
Finding their real story. Their real history is sometimes it's a disappointment that I didn't find what they were looking for. I couldn't prove that. But usually, as a case, an example, I had someone who they believed their ancestor was a tribal member, Choctaw in this particular case, and in Oklahoma. Well, they were there, but what I proved was that, yes, there were 3 people by the name they had given me on the Indian rolls, the Magic Dawes roll, but none of those 3 were their person. The one that was their person was a minister, and he was beloved by the community where he lived. When he died, 10,000 people showed up in the streets of the town to celebrate this person and to honor, but he was not a tribal member. He was
Okay.
somebody who protected, who supported, who loved on them,
Right.
and who had been a real part of that particular community, an important part of it, but a true friend, but not a tribal member.
Right.
And so it was like, look at this wonderful story that you now have of this wonderful person who was a friend of Indians, but no, they
Right.
were not a tribal member. So they had kind of yes, this is a disappointment, but
Sure.
look at this.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. In the era we live in, and I have to address it, I guess. Are there records that people can find online?
Oh, yes,
Because,
absolutely.
and if you would mind speaking to that a little bit, because I know
Sure.
there are a lot of people who either don't have access to a real library,
Sure.
or don't have the motivation to go to a library.
Well, a good many, as an Oklahoman, the American Indian Archives is located in Oklahoma City,
Okay.
and we have there. It's under the care of the Oklahoma Historical Society.
Okay.
And it is a federal, it is a National Archives affiliate, and it Congress actually passed the law that placed these records with the Oklahoma Historical Society the same year that the National Archives was created.
Okay.
So
Wow.
they've been there the entire time. They are federal records, but they are held here. Well, in about between 2012 and 2014, the Oklahoma Historical Society was approached to bring a team. It was Ancestry.com.
Okay.
They physically came and digitized some of the records that we had in that collection.
Okay.
They went to Fort Worth, Texas, at the Regional National Archives there, which is the records from the area where we are located.
Okay.
Our regional archives is Fort Worth. They digitized those records, and they also went to Washington, D.C., the National Archives, and digitized those records having to do with tribal government and interaction. Now, they didn't do everything. They never can.
Right.
But they did digitize a tremendous number of records. We had here in Oklahoma, we had records of 67 of the 69 tribes who have some interaction with the state of Oklahoma. We had, that's a bunch of records, tribes. We have 39 federally recognized tribes in the state of Oklahoma, but who headquartered here, but 69 tribes who have had something. We have part of things, but that's a tremendous number of records. Those digitized records are on Ancestry.com. It is a paid prescription site.
Right.
But most libraries have it available where you can go in and look. It's all under it's a special collection called the American Indian Collection.
Okay.
Or sometimes Native American will be also the designation. I think this one is American Indian.
Yeah.
You can go in there and see. If you check that, you can look at all of those. Those would be all of the special censuses that were of those areas that had large Indian populations. They actually did every single year a census of those. Those records are wonderful. You can follow people throughout. They range from about 1885 to about 1940.
Okay.
So you've got a big group that's all over the United States, not just in this area, not in just Oklahoma. That's a huge set of records.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the 5 tribes that most people are familiar with the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek or Muskogee Creek, and Seminole. Those 5 tribes are not in that census collection.
Okay.
They did their own censuses.
Oh, okay.
And so those also are on that website as well.
Okay.
Of course, the National Archives has a big group of those that they have been digitizing. So that would be another place to look. Okay. There is a website. It's a private. It's not by subscription, but it's called Accessible Genealogy, I believe. They have quite a few records that are not found other places. Okay. So that's another resource. And then you have the tribes themselves. Most, I will say, most of the especially the larger tribes have a website. Usually on that website, they will have contact information. Sometimes they will have an application form if you want to apply to become a member of the tribe. They usually have their constitution listed on the website, and that constitution is where you want to go to see what are the requirements if I want to apply for tribal membership. Well, what is their base role? Sure. What do you have to prove to? And sometimes most of those are much later than what people believe. Right. And so there will not be a tribal role that is their base role. You must prove from that. Right. So that's where people get caught up in what do I do? So,
it's interesting, when folks come to the OGS library, getting started, a lot of times their motivation is almost kind of like what you talked about when you were looking for your ancestor in the Revolution. But their motivation might be, I want to know if my ancestor came over on the Mayflower, or was it Jamestown, or this, that, or the other thing. When people come to you or are researching Native American roots, what is their motivation for that? Is there something that,
It is as varied as everybody else, depending on what they want. Most times I do ask that because, for one thing, sometimes if they tell me, and sometimes they don't tell me, but if they want, oftentimes they will say, well, I have a junior or senior in high school, and they're applying for colleges. And sometimes it will be that they want to apply for any educational benefits that they might get. But sometimes it's the colleges themselves who are looking to diversify their student body. Sure. And so they will give preference to admissions. That's a little tricky in this political climate right now, but sometimes it will be for that. Sometimes it's business people who are wanting to get a contract with the federal government or perhaps the state government. And they also sometimes will get preferential treatment as far as being getting government contracts. They will do that. They sometimes people will say they want to be on the health benefits that the tribes get. Each of those, where they are wanting something like that, I caution them that to make sure that they understand that a better reason is to find out about who you are rather than what I can get. And if it's what you can get, Yes, I'll do that for you, but you can understand why people who are of that particular tribe would be resentful.
Sure.
And so we kind of go
Yeah.
through an understanding there, and hopefully somewhere in the process, I can convince them that if that's really the reason you're doing this, maybe you need to think about it. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was my kind of question is, I know with casino revenue and all these other things that people talk about,
Yes.
It seems like a hairy subject for someone in your position.
It is, and it's that's one reason that I have to say, okay, it's possible that you at one time you had an ancestor who was involved with the tribe, but you're not going to qualify for any of those benefits because you cannot prove that ancestor was on the particular base role.
Sure.
And like some of the tribes have not only a base role, you had to have an ancestor, but they also will have a blood quantum, and you have to be 1/4. There's a whole bunch of tribes that have a 1/4 restriction. You must have. Well, you're going to know if you have a grandmother or grandfather who is full blood Indian.
Yeah.
You think they're not going to tell you?
Right. Yeah, you would think so.
So they don't usually come to me if that is it.
Well, that's good.
But because they're going to know.
Yeah.
It's usually those who have that story and it's farther back.
Yeah.
And it's a tribe that does not have a minimum blood quantum.
Okay.
So that cuts out a lot of people.
Sure.
Interestingly, some of the cases have been people who are members of a tribe that does have that blood quantum 1/4 restriction, and they must be of that tribe. I mean, it's extremely restrictive.
Right.
I know someone who on his DNA it was 89% Native American and 11% Eastern Asian, which supports the land mass.
Right. So
basically 100%.
Yeah.
Very rare to find that.
Yeah.
Well, he was on a tribal, a particular tribe. He was on their council. His daughter, when he was born, his grandfather refused to allow his father's name to go on it because he didn't like him. Yeah. So he went on the rolls as 1/2 of this particular tribe. Well, the daughter, who was then listed as 1/4, which really was 1/2, her children did no longer qualify for tribal membership.
Yeah.
That was interesting, dealing with what the records said and what the tribal so you run into interesting cases.
Kind of based on our conversation, I think I know how you'll answer this. My last question for you, but if someone's researching Native Americans, what's the one big piece of advice you would give them if they're researching their Native American family?
Learn about the tribe that you are wanting to connect with. You are not doing American Indian research. You are doing tribal research.
Right.
And they were different. They were important. The other is learn to respect it and to understand what their culture is, what their own heritage, what their own history is. We have this mistaken notion that history started, when people arrived in Jamestown.
Right.
I'm sorry, but I want to take them to Spiro, Oklahoma, where the commerce and the tribal industry was alive and well long before Columbus ever sailed this way.
Well, Billie Fogarty, thank you so much for joining me today on Ohio Roots and sharing your expertise and your knowledge with our audience. I really enjoyed this conversation, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Wow, what a great conversation that was with Billie Fogarty. I feel like I learned an awful lot about how I can track down an ancestor were I to have one who might have been associated with a Native American tribe. I think Billie's approach to it sounds incredibly professional and thoughtful, and I'm really happy that she joined us today, and I thank you all for listening to Ohio Roots Podcast.
The Ohio Roots Podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. Hosted by OGS Executive Director Noel Poirier and edited by Luke Poirier. Theme song is Beautiful Ohio, recorded by Bob Stanley and his orchestra in 1944. To learn more about joining the Ohio Genealogical Society, visit www.ogs.org.